Encampments stretched for miles along the Hudson's ragged spine. In the British camp, officers huddled under damp tarpaulins, poring over maps stained with rain and tobacco ash. Soldiers sharpened bayonets with whetstones, their redcoats darkened by mud and sap. Smoke curled from cook fires where hardtack was boiled into gruel. Morale was brittle, but orders were orders. Among them, General Simon Fraser paced slowly along the line of light infantry, nodding to sergeants and inspecting rifles. His voice, gravelly but composed, reminded the men that a final push would deliver them from this miserable theater and into glory. In the American camp, the tension was thicker. Militia officers argued over supply allocations while scouts returned breathless, reporting fresh British movement through the woods. Muskets were loaded and reloaded. Powder was rationed. The morning prayer at dawn was delivered in strained silence. Arnold stood beneath a chestnut tree, boots ankle-deep in mud, gloved hands clenched behind his back. He watched the ridgeline to the north, the route he knew Burgoyne would take. The arrogance of Gates' inaction burned more than the autumn chill. Arnold had begged to command the forward lines. He had been denied. Meanwhile, Daniel Morgan and his riflemen occupied the outermost thickets. Their eyes were sharp, their breath fogging in the morning air as they adjusted sights and murmured predictions. They knew the British columns would come through the trees like phantoms, and they were ready to bleed them. The British moved. Through the thick trees and up the wooded slopes, their red coats blended into the ruddy autumn hues. Hessians trudged forward with fixed bayonets. Highlanders whispered Gaelic prayers. The British plan: break the American right flank, take Bemis Heights, and open the road to Albany. But something was off. American orders were delayed. Riflemen under Daniel Morgan lacked direction. Without Arnold's leadership, there was no aggression, only hesitation. Gates, ensconced in his headquarters, refused to reinforce the front. By midday, British troops had breached the first line. Arnold, defying Gates' orders, rode into the fray with saber drawn. He rallied broken regiments. For a moment, the tide turned. Then a musket ball shattered his leg. He fell, pinned beneath his horse. And with him, hope collapsed. The Americans broke. Redoubts fell one by one. Gates fled. By nightfall, Burgoyne stood atop the heights, victorious. The revolution had been cut off at the knees. In the cities, loyalists rejoiced openly, while former rebels hung their tricorn hats in dark closets, trading dreams of liberty for silence. British soldiers were quartered in taverns and homes. Resistance pamphlets were burned in the public squares. In Boston, a statue of King George III was raised in the Commons, and in New York, the old Liberty Pole was torn down and replaced by the Crown Standard. In the Bat Country, resentment festered. Families that had given sons to the cause watched as imperial courts punished former militiamen. Some were fined, others were deported, a few were hanged under charges of sedition, but most simply disappeared into the mountains, joining scattered bands of holdouts who raided British supply lines and harassed tax collectors. Franklin returned from France a defeated man. His charm had faded into melancholy, and his influence evaporated, yet before resigning himself to obscurity, he made one final attempt to rally the fading cause. In the winter of 1783, Franklin organized a secret gathering in the cellar of Carpenter's Hall. There, by flickering candlelight and guarded by veterans of the Pennsylvania line, he delivered what would become his last great speech. Before a small crowd of former congressmen, disbanded soldiers, and fugitive pamphleteers, Franklin called for a second uprising, not one of muskets, but of minds. He urged the printing of underground papers, the teaching of revolutionary ideals in secret schools, and the creation of a shadow network of patriot lodges to preserve the soul of the rebellion until better days. They may crush the body of liberty, he said, but her ghost will walk beside every child who dares to ask, "What if we had won?" The speech was never printed. A Crown informant infiltrated the gathering. Days later, Franklin was placed under permanent surveillance and barred from public life. The network he envisioned dissolved before it could take root. But those who heard him remembered. Some passed on his words. Some carved them into barn doors and cellar beams. A few smuggled them west, beyond the eyes of empire. In his final public speech, he warned that a people unready to defend their liberty would one day forget they ever deserved it. By 1784, the rebellion had become a memory. Paintings were taken down. Speeches were forgotten. Even the Declaration of Independence, never publicly read after Saratoga, was labeled seditious literature. Copies were confiscated or buried in chests beneath floorboards. In coffee houses from Charleston to Philadelphia, whispers of what might have been echoed like ghost stories. Washington was no longer a general, just a farmer under surveillance. Arnold, though wounded, was never healed. Lafayette never returned. The French Revolution, when it came, would burn without its American spark. And yet, in mountain hollows and border towns, beneath candlelight in secret meetings, some still believed. By 1800, the colonies had been reorganized into the Dominion of Columbia. A governor-general ruled from Philadelphia under London's watchful eye. Colonial legislatures existed, but only as advisory bodies. There was no constitution, no Bill of Rights, no president. Thomas Jefferson retired to Monticello, bitter and unheard. John Adams returned to Massachusetts, never again holding public office. Alexander Hamilton, once a rising star of revolutionary finance, refused to accept the silence demanded of him. He resigned from his crown-appointed post and began publishing a series of pamphlets and essays under the title The Federal Voice. Branded a seditionist, Hamilton lived under constant surveillance. Printers who carried his work were fined or jailed. Yet his essays circulated in secret, hidden in false-bottom trunks, and read aloud in candlelit barns and backroom taverns. His final work, Letters to an Unborn Republic, was smuggled west and reprinted by frontier dissidents decades later. Hamilton died in obscurity, but his words survived. Of all the patriot thinkers, his was the lone voice that endured, preserved, memorized, and passed down like scripture by those who still believed freedom had a future. Benedict Arnold died of his wounds, unbetrayed, uncelebrated. Civic identity was replaced with imperial loyalty. School children learned not of liberty, but of order. The Union Jack flew from every courthouse. The Declaration of Independence was never read aloud again. Slavery, abolished by Parliament in the early 19th century across the empire, was ended slowly and selectively in Columbia. Without a civil war or abolitionist movement, emancipation was framed not as a moral imperative, but as a crown policy of economic reform. Enslaved people were freed on paper in 1834, but most became bound to the same plantations as indentured laborers. No civil rights followed. Freedmen could not vote, could not own land freely, and faced curfews in many southern districts. Racism was institutionalized by decree rather than violence. Rebellions were put down swiftly, and their leaders quietly executed or transported. The language of equality was expunged from textbooks. Expansion westward was slow and deliberate, managed by royal charter. Indigenous nations were not obliterated but confined, their lands parceled through treaty and trade. The Mississippi River became the outer boundary of Crown dominion for nearly 50 years. In the absence of war, growth stagnated. Roads remained dirt. Towns remained small. The continent waited in silence. A young teacher named Abraham Lincoln began teaching the freed slaves how to read and write. He also taught Hamilton's book along with his associate Henry Carey. By day, he taught history and scripture. By night, he recited smuggled passages from Hamilton's essays and Franklin's speeches. His students learned to ask questions forbidden in Crown schools. They learned that liberty once had a voice and might yet speak again. Though monitored by local magistrates and harassed by company enforcers, Lincoln persisted. He never raised a sword, but he raised a generation that remembered. His name never appeared in official records, but in the whispers of the Pine Barrens and the notes scribbled in hymnals, he was known simply as the schoolmaster. Not all colonial sons faded quietly into obscurity. One rose, not in rebellion, but in service to the crown. Theodore Roosevelt, scion of a wealthy mercantile family, embraced the imperial order with the fervor of a born warrior. By the 1890s, he had risen to prominence within the British Army, earning accolades in campaigns across Africa and the Middle East. But it was in the Crown's conquest of the crumbling Spanish Empire that Roosevelt made his name. Leading colonial regiments composed of Dominion-born soldiers, Roosevelt stormed Havana in 1898 under the Union Jack, not the Stars and Stripes. He became known as the Bull of the Empire, a charismatic and unrelenting commander whose exploits were celebrated in London newspapers and royal courts alike. Though adored by the British elite, Roosevelt's legacy was complicated in Colombia. Some saw him as a hero, others as a traitor to the spirit of the old rebellion. He died a viscount, buried in Westminster, but his statue in Philadelphia was defaced more than once by those who remembered what liberty might have meant. The Southern Confederation, dominated by royal loyalists and company men, became a land of fields without food. The Columbia West India Trade Company monopolized agriculture, converting plantations into cotton factories. Local farmers were banned from growing subsistence crops. Everything was for export. Everything was for profit. When the cotton markets collapsed in 1911, the company doubled quotas. Then came the droughts. From 1912 to 1917, tens of thousands starved. Black tenant farmers died first. Then came poor whites. Entire counties emptied. The company hoarded grain. Imperial troops put down bread riots in Savannah and Birmingham. The Crown issued a report calling it a regional misfortune. It was a famine, man-made and racially skewed. The slogan whispered in the burned fields of Alabama said it all. The company feeds no one. The Crown buries the rest. In the wake of the famine, secret societies sprang up, muted voices in the night, the Pine Torch Union, Freedmen's Daughters. They smuggled food, hid rebels, and recorded forbidden histories. But the world looked away. The empire stood tall, and the poor were forgotten. Among those who quietly resisted the empire's narrative was Franklin Delano Roosevelt, a reserved schoolteacher with a clubbed foot and a brilliant mind. Born into a loyalist family, he turned away from privilege and instead took up the torch of forbidden memory. By day, he taught arithmetic and empire-approved civics. But after hours, behind closed doors and thick curtains, he told different stories. Franklin never published, never rallied crowds, never led a march. But over 3 decades, he became a quiet apostle of the lost revolution, inspiring generations to imagine a world in which their grandparents had won. Among those students sat a bright, sharp-tongued boy named John Fitzgerald Kennedy. The son of a shipping clerk, he listened intently to Roosevelt's forbidden lessons. As he grew older, he inherited Franklin's mantle. Quietly at first, organizing reading circles, collecting lost pamphlets, preserving oral histories, and later, more boldly, Kennedy traveled the provinces under the guise of a lecturer, reciting Hamilton's words from memory and teaching children to question what they read in Crown-approved textbooks. Where Roosevelt had whispered, Kennedy spoke, and though he never held public office, he became known in secret circles as the Orator of the Republic. His voice, captured only in forbidden recordings and smuggled writings, would become a beacon to those who dreamed of a second chance. In Philadelphia, past shelves of books approved by the Crown. In the back, behind a dusty curtain, she finds a faded pamphlet, 13 stars, a ring of hope, and 4 words written beneath it, "We could have been free."
Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe. Until next time, keep our heroes alive.